Welcome to episode 3. Continuing the series for Loki, episode 3. So, something I don't think I mentioned in the previous episode is that this isn't really meant to be something of an in depth analysis in any way. It's more so meant to be just my thoughts as I'm rewatching the series, and then some of my ideas for how the series can go in season 2, and some of the more overarching stuff that can come of this series for Marvel in general, the movies going forward, and everything to do with the next phase, ending the saga that they've made for the multiverse. So for this episode, it says that the episode length is 41 minutes. Let's begin. As always, it begins with a recap of previous episodes. Skip ahead past that a little bit. Then the episode starts. It would be a little bit of a spoilers, but that's fine because everybody should have already watched this before listening to this particular podcast. But Sylvie talking with one of the TVA agents within their mind. Which is really interesting. Because I'm not too sure we've ever seen in the rest of the series Sylvie use a technique like this. But this is a very useful technique if used anywhere else within the TVA for other agents, or like imagine if she used it for Mobius and unlocked some of his memories from before he became an agent. Like I was saying in the previous episode, imagine something like that happening and fully unlocking their memories, or something along the lines of them being given now a choice as to what they want to do with their lives instead of whatever this brainwashing occurred to make them believe that they've always been an agent for the TVA. Now, of course, we know Sylvie's end goal. If you've seen the series, she is looking for whoever's in charge of the TVA, the people behind the scenes. At this point, I believe she still thinks that they're the three lizard people, quote unquote, that are running everything, the timekeepers. So she's just directly looking to go up against them. And then at 4 minutes in, we have Sylvie popping into the TVA from the Apocalypse store that they were in. Her trying to use her powers clearly seemed to work a little bit, but it didn't affect the TVA agent. There may be some kind of protection for the agents within the TVA, or what they're wearing is protecting them. So I can't really tell. And of course, Loki pops in at about 5 minutes in, as he chose to go after her. Absolute right decision, of course. And all of it calls into question, is this all meant to be? Is all of the things that are happening here within the TVA meant to happen? And so he finds the golden doors that are supposed to lead to the timekeepers. It's also odd that they're just guards standing by this door. I don't know if that's because they have Loki in here, and they're like, oh, we can't really trust if Loki might actually get past us again and tried to come here, or if they've been preparing for Sylvie, that she might get this far, or they just always have a guard or two guards standing by that door. But if they do, what's the purpose? Then Loki versus Sylvie. As they bicker a little bit while fighting, Bonus shows up. Two of them have to escape. And they end up in this place. And now the Tempad doesn't have any battery left, unfortunately. Loki finally uses at least some of his power to do a thing. Yeah, he is technically a magician. Of course, they ended up in an apocalypse world. Lamentus 1. Such a perfect name for something that's like this. And again, an interesting situation where they've hopped into the future. And not just a future of a different planet, moon altogether. I believe it's the moon that's crashing into this planet, and not that they're on the moon, and the planet is crashing into the moon, either way. I can't remember, they just said it and I was talking over it. But that means that from any point in time, they can hop using those Tempads to some other point in time and space. So wherever or whenever they are, it doesn't matter, they could hop to anywhere and any when. Sylvie tries to use her powers on Loki, and they don't work. But either way, that means that when they're deleting timelines, they must be deleting everything within that universe. All the planets, all the stars, everything. Starting from the center point of wherever, if they're on Earth, Earth, or if they're on another planet, that planet. And it just ripples outwards, I'm assuming. Because again, it wouldn't be enough to just destroy that one Earth or that little area where the effect is happening. Because then it's just missing from time if you're deleting all the things in that area. And now they begin their journey across Lamantis. This episode is so good. We get some time with the two of them. Extremely, extremely personal, I think, to be able to have just the focus be on the two of them. Have them talk with one another. Have them work together, learn to trust one another. This episode just has all of that. And of course, having them both question one another. and showing that they're not the same, even though they're both Loki, technically. You know, his plan, he doesn't even really know what plan he has. He's just working with the TVA for now, trying to figure out something. And then for her, you know, she was just gonna pop in, destroy place, and then, you know, then what? That Loki says. And they come across this little house place. I think this is a house where this person lives. Clearly Loki's still too suspicious, unwilling to give the tempad over. The whole problem here is they're both very untrusting. And of course, can the god of mischief trust the god of mischief? And for them both to learn to eventually trust one another. And Mobius learning to trust Loki. Loki learning to trust Mobius. We don't really get the dynamic, unfortunately, of all three of them, which would have been nice if we had gotten more of that. Only really, I think, near the end a little bit you kind of get that, and then not really. Hopefully, season 2 has a lot more of that. It would be really nice to see the dynamic of the three of them. And of course, there's a few other characters that I believe will join the cast, the main cast, and seeing the interaction between all of them would be really nice. They're both told about the Ark. It's an evacuation vessel. They'll have to go use the train. Well, there's about 15 minutes in. So clearly there are guards guarding the train and only approving people with tickets to get on. Them coming up with a plan on how to get on the train. It is a great plan. And just like that, you got through. And now they need tickets. And it took both of them, both of their powers, to be able to get through this situation. Them working together. Him using his transformation ability to cloak himself as somebody else. And then her using her ability to brainwash. See, this exact style of plan is very reminiscent of things like cartoons or whatever. You just come up with a quick plan and go for it. Very much like a Thor adventure, Thor and Loki adventure. I see them doing things like this, and them both having a very personal conversation. Loki talking about his mother. He clearly very cared about his mother, cared very much about her. Sylvie not knowing her parents, talking about finding out how they were adopted or how they found out that they were adopted. I think they're at least Loki is being completely sincere here. I don't think he's had in his entire life anybody to really talk to about anything like this, or anybody who would really understand. The fireworks thing is an amazing touch. And him basically saying she's the only person who ever believed in him. Again, being completely sincere and honest and open. Bickering. There's still some distrust between them, obviously. And you could notice, obviously, that Sylvie isn't necessarily being as open and as talkative. Love is hate. Classic. Serious long distance relationship with the postman. I wonder if she's telling the truth about that. I don't know if she could have possibly stayed in one place long enough to actually have a relationship, long distance or not, and risking hopping back, even if it's an apocalypse world. I don't know if that's even possible. Them properly getting to know each other. I kind of want to see more of this in season 2. Like, they had a lot of time here to get to know one another and go closer together. Loki singing, he's just awesome. Completely drunk, which is funny. I'm just wondering what Sylvie's thinking in this particular scene. I have a feeling in that scene, she just remembers her mission and all of this just being a distraction from that mission. And that he's clearly not taking this seriously and just doesn't understand. And Loki's description of love doesn't make sense, but started out sounding very, very interesting, very poetic. So very much like a deepity, something that sounds deep, but if you really think about it, kinda isn't at all. Her taking off her horns and attacking somebody with it is just awesome. I really like fight scenes where you utilize, everything that you have. It's not just for decoration. Then Loki gets thrown out of the train, and then Sylvie will have to go with him because he has a temp pad. And the temp pad is just completely destroyed. The frustration and the anger and the everything that's wrong with this situation being released. It's just so real. It feels so real what she just did. Because this whole situation is just a mess. Everything's just a mess. Yes, they're on a moon. A planet's crashing into them. And this is a pretty brilliant strategy. trying to undo an apocalypse, or at least change the timeline in such a way that clearly, if they manage to succeed or even get close to succeeding, they're creating a Nexus event. Again, more of them just talking, which is nice. Just nice to see. Like, I really like the balance between going from fighting to something more calm and personal. And now Loki finds out there's a before joining the TVA. And him learning that they're all variants. Every single one of them. Before this is clear that he doesn't really know how messed up everything is. But seeing that, I think, starts to sow seeds within his mind that Sylvie's mission is a good mission and worthwhile and worth fighting. I was really rooting for them in this particular scene as they try to go into the Ark. I honestly thought that's how this was going to play out. Where they do somehow manage to get onto the Ark and change things just enough. But of course, that doesn't happen. Again, really cool action sequence. Them running through this town trying to get to the thing. Obviously, in a situation like this, they're forced to have to trust one another. They're forced to have to work together, no matter what. And seeing Loki's power on display here is really cool as well. Him using a lot more of his abilities. And then the Ark gets completely destroyed. And having the person in the background fall to their knees. And then go on their hands and knees. Beautiful touch. This episode and its whole focus on Loki, Sylvie, their dynamic, them growing somewhat close to one another, opening up to one another. You get to really hear Loki's true feelings, and it really paints a better picture, a more whole picture of his character. And you could start to make the connections between all of these things that he's saying on the train to Sylvie, and how he's been acting in all the previous movies that he's been in, and why he is the way that he is. You could start drawing these lines and these connections as an explanation for his character and why his character is that way, why he is not just the god of mischief, but also more encompassing that mischievous side instead of, and the drive for the glorious purpose and wanting to rule and all of that. It better encompasses him as a character when you hear everything that he thinks and what he's feeling in that scene. And it seems like he is being genuine. He's not trying to hide anything, he's not playing games, he's not being mischievous in any way. It really sounds like he's opening up properly and honestly. And I think the only reason that he's doing this is because he's talking to somebody who he feels can truly understand who he is, as they are technically a variant of himself. If anybody in the entire multiverse can understand him, it would be another him. So, in his mind, having somebody like that to talk to, I think he feels like, this is the only opportunity he really has to truly be honest with himself and with somebody else. Now, there was a little bit of this with Mobius back in the TVA, where he was kind of almost backed into a corner, and he had to be forced to open up in a way, where Mobius continued to, you know, point out all of the flaws in the way that he thinks and his actions and how his plans don't really make any sense and what he's saying doesn't really make any sense. It's like, and him being in that situation in a room that looked like that, it's very much an interrogation, yes. And as Mobius said, the psychobabble and whatever that he's trying to, you know, go at him with. But all of it ended up kind of forcing him to open up and forcing him to be honest with Mobius and with himself about who he is and what he really thinks and all of that. And it's clear that he understands himself, even if he's not always, I guess, conscious of it, or it's not always at the forefront of his mind. Deep down, he understands who he is and how he operates, and what drives him, and how it's not really. It doesn't seem like it's when he reminisces on that or when he starts admitting that, it doesn't seem like he truly wants to be the person that I guess he's convinced himself that he needs to be to get his his rulership, get his throne or whatever. It almost seems like he knows that that's the wrong path that he's going down, and he knows it's not going to get him anywhere, even if he ends up becoming a ruler of either a planet or the Nine Realms or even the universe. Is just not going to get him what he ultimately wants in the end. And then him opening up with Sylvie here just furthers that, where he understands why he is how he is, and he understands, that he is capable of opening up to somebody else and talking about all of this stuff that he's probably never been able to talk to anybody about. And I think if given the opportunity, him and Thor having a conversation, like a proper open conversation, might be of benefit. And I think Thor was kind of almost in that situation where he was like, he talked to Loki honestly and openly in Ragnarok. And Loki understood him and what he was saying and decided to join forces with him. And from that point on, they were kind of together. They came back or they started back to Earth and then Thanos shows up. But it almost seems like Thor seems more like the type of person who's willing to wear his heart on his sleeve and be more open like that with various people, more open and honest. And he was kind of forced to be like that in the sequel, the other movie. Um, and it almost seemed like he had to confront himself, like in the very first movie. He had to confront himself and who he was and become somebody better. And he almost seems like he gained a glorious purpose, quote unquote, in that movie. And then the next movie is kind of like it was the same him. He didn't really change all that much. And then in the Avengers movie, he kind of got a found family, sort of, and learned how to work with these other heroes and stuff. Even though technically he did have a family like that with the warriors that he was, he fought side by side with back on Asgard. So he was more primed, I think, and open to be able to have that kind of thing. But then to really talk to his brother about, you know, how he felt, especially after their father passed away, knowing that he had somebody there, I think was really important for both of them. But of course, this Loki in the series hasn't gone through that yet. This is a completely different Loki from quite a while before all of that. But I think this Loki is in a far better position right now than the other Loki as part of the main timeline, the sacred timeline, was at any point in time. I think if this particular Loki were to meet that Thor, they would be able to have a much better open conversation with one another. And it kind of sucks that he may never get to meet Thor, but I'm kind of hoping that that will happen in the next Thor movie, possibly. Where I'm predicting for that movie that he's gonna end up trying to find Jane, and there's going to be some sort of threat that maybe affects the afterlife, and they're gonna kind of have to work together. One of them being in the afterlife with like Heimdall and his father Odin and all the other Asgardians that are in Valhalla. All of them will have to, I guess, sort of work together, and Thor will have to kind of break in there and then maybe find a way to break them all out. But I don't know how any of that, because that's something that I kind of hope for in the next movie, for all of that to happen, because it'll just tie everything up in a neat bow, and then you wouldn't have any more loose ends. And if this particular Loki were to be a part of all of that, or join in at a certain part of the movie, and then have the dynamic of this Loki and this Loki meeting that Thor, and that Thor finding his Loki in Valhalla, which I'm assuming, even though he's not Asgardian, I'm assuming that it's still possible for him to enter Valhalla, just the same way that Jane did, and because he basically sacrificed himself trying to save everybody there on that ship from Thanos. So I'm thinking that that would have been more than enough to grant him access to Valhalla, if that's kind of how it works with frost giants, if they can do that, or unless they have another belief. But he's raised as an Asgardian. He didn't know until up to some point in his life that he wasn't one. So I would assume he has the same faith or beliefs and stuff like that. I don't know if he's gone back to the frost giants to learn their culture or their beliefs or anything. So it's more likely than not that he is in Valhalla, and it would be really cool to have that kind of situation. But the way I kind of want everything to work out and the nice little bow for it to all be tied together is for Thor's, I guess, final acts to be, he's raising a child, and this child is, I'm assuming this child is like part god being, and that god being that Gore makes a wish upon kind of becomes his daughter. And I don't know if that's entirely god being, entirely daughter, or just a mix of both. I'm assuming it's a mix of both. And him, I assume, will just continue to raise this god child being up until a certain point, and then that being will go on in the MCU. And I'm thinking that Thor will have to sacrifice himself in some way to be able to maybe save Valhalla or save somebody from something at some point in a future movie. And I'm hoping that it'll involve this Loki, which could lead to the ending of, the Loki series and the Loki from this series. It could lead to the end of Thor himself as a character, where this child will become the next Thor. And then he can just go to Valhalla and just rest there with everybody, with his Loki, with his father, with his mother, with Heimdall. He'll have Jade there, and then they could end the Thor series in that way, but still have something carry on if they want to use a character in future. And then for this particular Loki, as part of the Loki series, either that could be this Loki's end, or this Loki can continue on to be a Loki in that universe, in the new multiverse that's created after dealing with Kang. But that's just kind of my rough ideas as to how everything can be kind of tied up in a more neat-ish bow. Obviously, it's not super detailed or anything like that, but it's almost like this entire arc is supposed to be somewhat dark and having Kang, I guess, torment and kill various characters that we've grown with all this time. And it's almost like how it happened with Thanos, but they ended Thanos with only two characters actually dying. Technically three. And then everybody else being brought back from the snap. And not really having. Well, there are consequences, and I kind of wish they would show more of the real world consequences like they did in Falcon and the Winter Soldier. But there aren't really any consequences that were, I guess, as big for the heroes as maybe they should have been. Like, Iron Man dying was the worst thing that could have possibly happened, and a terrible ending for that character. And I do not understand why it had to happen that way. And it would kind of have made more sense if maybe Captain America had sacrificed himself, or maybe Hulk had done it in that time. But then for the Hulk to have done that, it wouldn't really make too much sense for his character in particular. But then it almost tried to write it as he sacrifices himself ish in returning all of the Infinity Stones to where they need it to be, which is never explained, and the time travel aspect of all of that doesn't make any sense. Or maybe it does, who knows. I would need to go back and try to map out how any of that could make any sense. And then for him to have lived his entire lifespan with Peggy even though we know that it seemed like she remarried somebody, but then I guess that was him that she remarried and he just pretended to be somebody else and they kept that secret all that time. And then he just stayed hidden, even though all these other things were happening, and even though, he could have shown up, even though he was already there in any time that the world was in danger, he would have had to force himself, I guess, to just not also show up again and interfere with his past self or any of the past versions of all of the other Avengers or any other hero in general, and make sure that he never lets slip all of the things that are meant to happen during the entire period from when he was reawakened from the ice. Or actually, no, he went back further, I believe. He went back all the way to when he had become Captain America in the first place. So he would have had to keep secret everything from that point going forward until we see him again passing on the shield. And making sure he never interfered with anything, never broke the timeline. It would have been kind of more interesting if we get to see from his point of view him returning all the Infinity Stones and then him trying to go back to live out a life with Peggy and the TVA just showing up and being like, oh, well, you can't do that. And then him, I guess, either working out a deal or Kang being like, he sends Ravonna to tell him, okay, here's how you can, live out your life. You have to follow all these strict rules, or we're just going to show up and we're going to erase you from the timeline, or we're going to reset things, or, whatever threat they could pose to keep him in line, I guess. But all of that needs to be a part of, or at least within, the sacred timeline that Kang has created. All of this needs to have happened. And I guess he was just cool with it all happening this way. All the weird, wacky time travel stuff. He's just like, okay, that's fine. It doesn't really interfere with me being born and me, finding the Alliath, becoming this particular Kang, winning against all the other Kangs. So I'm guessing in that sense, he's totally fine with it, since because Captain America would have to have been given the rules as to not have broken anything. And I assume time is fine with him just doing that. Like, if this was DC, you'd have Time Wraith showing up and all the other wacky stuff when you try to mess with time in this way. Having a paradox form, having all of that need to be dealt with. But I guess Marvel can more so hand wave this away because Kang is in charge of all the timelines of the one sacred timeline, and if Kang is somehow able to hold it all together and not have anything crack or fracture or break, and he's just like, okay, this still fits within the spectrum or the ring of time or whatever. If it's all still, the way I want it to be, then everything's fine. But getting back to my hope slash idea for the future of this series, or the future of this particular Loki, I kind of want everything to end with this Loki in terms of the saga and Kang, because it all starts with this Loki and this Sylvie and this Mobius and whoever else joins the team in season 2. And I kind of want to see this through and have these people be the main people to end up dealing with Kang in the end, on top of all the other Avengers we've come to know. Like, clearly Ant-Man has stake in the game now, and he'll have to be there for the final battle. We have the Guardians of the Galaxy, not really. They didn't really interact with Kang in any way. So I don't exactly see them necessarily needing to come back together to deal with a Kang, but I expect them to. And I expect not just the new Guardians of the Galaxy, which I expected to branch off into a new series of movies. They could just reboot the franchise of Guardians of the Galaxy with the new set of Guardians. And I kind of see that happening, and it won't be under James Gunn, unfortunately. But I also see the old group as well returning, hopefully, to deal with the Kang situation. Maybe not all of them will return, but at the very least, the majority of them, or at least have cameos with them. I think that would be really nice. Especially if my idea for how Marvel plans to go forward with the MCU would be to have it kind of end with Kang, and then after Kang's defeat, after you deal with that being, having the multiverse be free, and having Marvel itself be free to do one-off series or series of movies that don't have to tie in with other movies or other shows, and just having them be completely free to do kind of what they want. And if they do want like more Avengers style movies, they build it in small pieces rather than have it be a long continuous string of movies, 30, 40 movies or whatever, plus TV shows, plus whatever else they might want to throw in there, to just have it be little one-offs that don't at all in anybody's mind need to be connected in any way, or need to have little hints or cameos or anything like that to be part of one thing. It could all just be part of this one big multiverse, and if it ever needs to be tied in together, they could just deal with the legwork of tying it in at the beginning of the movie or throughout a movie, if they choose to do an Avengers style movie in the future, which I think they probably will. But that's kind of my idea to have to dealing with this particular Loki. And to deal with Thor, I kind of think it would be nice to have him have a peaceful ending. Maybe not necessarily dying and having to go to Valhalla. Maybe having some kind of loophole to have all the people of Valhalla revived in some way. I don't know how that would happen, but if time is being messed with, there's nothing to say that these beings can't just be revived in some way. It literally looks like they disintegrate into this gold dust and that flies all the way to Valhalla and rebuilds them over there. It doesn't look like, their body disintegrates and then a soul spawns somewhere else. It almost looks like, or maybe that is what's happening. Maybe their body does just disintegrate and the sparkles that fly off are their soul. But there's no reason I can see as to why that can't be undone or reversed, or why, since they're technically, it's a weird concept, and afterlife is such a weird concept both in real life and in movies, where it's almost like, oh well, you're dead but you're not gone forever, you kind of still exist somewhere else. So then the question becomes, well, why can't you re-exist the way you did before with a body and all of that? Like, oh well, there are rules against that. Are there? And who's enforcing them? And why are there such rules like that? And we've seen with Gore the God Butcher, you could just kill various gods, like those things can die as well. It almost seems like there's nothing in all of Marvel or within the MCU or in the comic books or anything that can't be killed. And then you have beings like Nexus beings that technically, I guess, can't be killed because the universe needs them to function, if I'm understanding what those are correctly. Because that's more of a comic book concept and not, it hasn't really been introduced in the MCU, and I'm not too sure they will. But I have a feeling that card is going to be pulled for Kang, and possibly also for Wanda. And it'll be interesting to see how the MCU deals with a character like that. But I'm thinking that if a character like that truly can't be killed, and whatever kill means in that context, like if kill means, they're just, their body disintegrates or whatever and their soul is somewhere else, does that count as them still being in existence? Therefore, they still function as their role and they're not technically you know, their death doesn't technically count as the universe breaking apart or shattering or timeline shattering or whatever. Because whatever a nexus being means, I'm wondering if, because I'm pretty sure in the comics, Wanda in some capacity dies, quote unquote, but then she comes back. And I'm wondering if technically that can happen to Kang as well, but it doesn't really matter. In the end, to deal with Kang, all you really have to do is trap him somewhere. And that was proven in Quantumania. It's just you try to trap him in the quantum realm, he figures out a way to get out. So you need to trap him somewhere where he physically can't do that. And I'm sure there must exist places like that where he can't build anything, he can't command any people. It's just devoid of all life and all things. And just put him there. And then he's fine. He's not bothering anybody. You could just put all the other Kangs there. Anyone that tries to cause a problem, you just stick them all there. And then they just can't do anything. Either that or try to deal with him in some other way, but I don't really see any other way working. I don't see the method of, stopping him from being born working. I don't see the method of killing him working. I don't think that's going to be the answer in the end either. It just seems too simple. We just kill him and that's it. And it was already kind of done with Thanos. They just kind of offed him, and that was it. They just snapped everybody back, snapped him away, and that was it. It's like I don't really see that working with Kang this time. It kind of doesn't feel enough, but I also don't know how they'll continue setting up Kang. And again, Kang is supposed to be the type of character that is meant to, wage war against everybody. And that kind of hasn't happened yet either, and you don't really get the gravity of how his character should be, at least from the movies so far. The Loki series, I think, did a really good job setting up the feel of how Kang should be, in my mind, without knowing any of the comic book Kang or how that Kang is supposed to be in any way. I think they're clearly making their own interpretation and their own version, their own variant of Kang. The worrisome bit, though, is them introducing all those other Kangs in Quantumania. I don't know if they have the time or the resources or there exist enough years to be able to make a good enough movie to properly utilize those other characters, those other Kangs in any way. Properly introduce them, figure out their motivations. I'm worried that something like that might feel rushed. And same with having too many characters on screen at the same time in one big Avengers style movie, where you would kind of have to gloss over characters or just have them be more background. And it kind of it doesn't do them justice to have it like that. And it's just a big mess of characters running around, all these main characters. So, although I kind of do want something like that, I don't really know if it'll work the same way. And obviously, Kang is gonna wage war against other Kangs. So, seeing that happen, plus having all of the new Avengers, some of the old Avengers, maybe Avengers from other timelines or other multiverses show up, it almost seems like they're setting up an even bigger mess of hodgepodge characters all over the place, going everywhere in every direction. And it could be an interesting thing. It might be too much. It might not be. I don't know how they plan on playing all of that, how they plan on doing all of that. But I kind of want to see them give proper endings to each character's arcs in the MCU. I don't necessarily know if Cap's ending was good. I don't entirely like it. I kind of want to see more from his point of view and what actually happened. I obviously don't like Iron Man's ending. Black Widow's as well just seemed wrong on every level. And Gamora, she just straight up dies, and then you kind of bring a past version of her forward into this new timeline, and that's just the one that's here now. And that absolute mess of what that is, but I absolutely adore how they dealt with it in Guardians 3. How they how they played the dynamic between the characters and had them understand and come to accept that Gamora is just a completely different person and not the same person, and everybody just has to accept that and move on. And the little hint of her, I guess, being curious as to what her life would have been if she had lived that same life as the other her. But then her, moving forward with her life, with the life that she has now built, this new version of her. I think that was done really, really well. All the lines between them, between Peter and her. But I really do hope that they, at least for the characters that they're planning to give an ending to, they give a more proper ending and not just off the character and that's just it. And then as for Spider-Man, I absolutely hated how they kind of reset his character there. But I'll talk about that if I do when I do a review on the Spider-Mans and the movies. That one upset me deeply. Iron Man upset me deeply. Like, I can't believe they did that. There was a perfect ending for his character arc. Everything was just so perfect, and then they just off him at the end. It felt so wrong. And that's why I'm really hoping going forward, Marvel doesn't do that to too many other characters, especially characters that I really care about. That would hurt. And I think Peter's ending in Guardians 3, I on the one hand, I don't necessarily want that to be an ending for him. I kind of want that to be almost a bookend to a portion of his life and to be able to deal with everything that he should have dealt with and had been running from this entire time. Being able to reconnect with the family that he has left on Earth and being able to kind of, on the one hand, choose to live as a normal person just on Earth, but then on the other hand, also being able to move forward and become Star Lord again and go out and be a hero again. I think that both of those could work, and he could have a continuation to his story in the MCU as being Star Lord again after dealing with being able to live as a human, being able to move past his mother passing away, and him basically being abducted from Earth and being almost on the run the entire time, running away from everything that had happened to him. Throughout the movies, him being able to deal with his father, and then now being able to deal with coming back home and taking those steps. I think that would be really good. And a really nice, I guess, sort of way to end his character might actually be him and Gamora ending up together again. This better version of him who's dealt with everything that he needs to deal with, going back out into space, finding her again, this other version of her that was also able to deal with everything she needed to deal with. That might be a better setup for the two of them than they had previously. So I think that would be a really nice way, if they do want to end his character and her character, to have them end up like that. retiring in a sense together. But of course, that's me really, really reaching and hoping for things that probably would never happen. I just have to hope for the characters that they currently have and the characters I know for sure will show up at some point in the future to have a decent enough ending that I could be satisfied with it and be able to say, okay, fine, I could move on and watch whatever next thing you're gonna throw at me, whatever next character I need to be invested in, whatever next story is gonna be told. As long as the endings for the characters they decide to retire or put away are good enough. But yeah, I think I've rambled on long enough, and I'll end this one here.